Welcome to George MacDonald and Us. This is Catherine.
And this is Sean.
And today on the George MacDonald and Us podcast, we are going to be reading the second section of The Castle, which is a George MacDonald short story. And if you are wondering where the first half is, that is the episode before this one. So I believe it's episode 4 of our show. And if you want to listen to the first half of the story and hear our discussion of it, please refer back to the previous episode. And tonight, without further ado, we are going to complete the reading of George MacDonald's short story, The Castle, and wrap up our discussion of it. So please join us. We're happy to have you along.
Morning dawned, and there they lay, and there he stood. But at a word from him they arose and went about their various duties, though listlessly enough. The eldest sister was the last to rise, and when she did, it was only by a terrible effort that she was able to reach her room, where she fell again on the floor. There she remained lying for days. The brother caused the doors of the great suite of rooms to be closed, leaving them just as they were, with all the childish adornment scattered about, and the rain still falling in through the shattered windows. Thus let them lie, he said, till the rain and frost have cleansed them of paint and drapery. No storm can hurt the pillars and the arches of these halls. The hours of this day went heavily. The storm was gone, but the rain was left. The passion had departed, but the tears remained behind. Dull and dark, the low, misty clouds brooded over the castle and the lake, and shut out all the neighborhood. Even if they had climbed to the loftiest known turret, they would have found it swathed in a garment of clinging vapor, affording no refreshment to the eye and no hope to the heart. There was one lofty tower that rose sheer 100 feet above the rest, and from which the fog could have been seen lying in a gray mass beneath. But that tower they had not yet discovered, nor another close beside it, the top of which was never seen, nor could be, for the highest clouds of heaven clustered continually around it. The rain fell continuously, though not heavily. Without and within too, there were clouds from which dropped the tears which are the rain of the Spirit. All the good of life seemed for the time departed, and their souls lived but as leafless trees that had forgotten the joy of the summer, and whom no wind prophetic of spring had yet visited. They moved about mechanically, and had not strength enough left to wish to die. The next day the clouds were higher, and a little wind blew through such loopholes in the turrets as the false improvements of the inmates had not yet filled with glass, shutting out as the storm, so the serene visitings of the heavens. Throughout the day the brother took various opportunities of addressing a gentle command, now to one and now to another of his family. It was obeyed in silence. The wind blew fresher through the loopholes and the shattered windows of the great rooms, and found its way by unknown passages to faces and eyes hot with weeping. It cooled and blessed them. When the sun arose the next day, it was in a clear sky. By degrees everything fell into the regularity of subordination. With the subordination came an increase of freedom. The steps of the more youthful of the family were heard on the stairs and in the corridors more light and quick than ever before. Their brother had lost the terrors of aspect produced by his confinement, and his commands were issued more gently, and oftener with a smile, than in all their previous history. By degrees his presence was universally felt throughout the house. It was no surprise to anyone at his studies to see him by his side when he lifted up his eyes. though he had not before known that he was in the room. And although some dread still remained, it was rapidly vanishing before the advances of a firm friendship. Without immediately ordering their labors, he always influenced them and often altered their direction and objects. The change soon evident in the household was remarkable. A simpler, nobler expression was visible on all the countenances. The voice of the men were deeper, and yet seemed by their very depth more feminine than before, while the voices of the women were softer and sweeter, and at the same time more dull and decided. Now the eyes had often an expression as if their sight was absorbed in the gaze of the inward eyes, and when the eyes of two met, there passed between those eyes the utterance of a conviction that both meant the same thing. But the change was, of course, to be seen more clearly, though not more evidently, in individuals. One of the brothers, for instance, was very fond of astronomy. He had his observatory on a lofty tower, which stood pretty clear of the others, towards the north and east. But hitherto, his astronomy, as he called it, had been more of the character of astrology. Often, too, he might have been seen directing a heaven-searching telescope to catch the rapid transit of a fiery shooting star, belonging altogether to the earthly atmosphere, and not to the serene heavens. He had to learn that the signs of the air are not the signs of the skies. Nay, once his brother surprised him in the act of examining through his longest tube a patch of burning heath upon a distant hill. But now he was diligent from morning till night in the study of the laws of the truth that has to do with the stars. And when the curtain of the sunlight was about to rise from before the heavenly worlds which it had hidden all day long, he might be seen preparing his instruments with that solemn countenance with which it becometh one to look into the mysterious harmonies of nature. Now he learned what law and order and truth are, what consent and harmony mean, how the individual may find his own end in a higher end, where law and freedom mean the same thing, and the purest certainty exists without the slightest constraint. Thus he stood on the earth and looked to the heavens. Another, who had been much given to searching out the hollow places and recesses in the foundations of the castle, and who was often to be found with compass and ruler working away at a chart of the same, which he had been in the process of constructing, now came to the conclusion that only by ascending the upper regions of his abode could he become capable of understanding what lay beneath, and that in all probability one clear prospect from the top of the highest attainable turret over the castle as it lay below would reveal more of the idea of its internal construction than a year spent in wandering through its subterranean vaults. But the fact was that the desire to ascend, awakening within him, had made him forget what was beneath, and having laid aside his chart for a time at least, he was now to be met in every quarter of the upper parts, searching and striving upward, now in one direction, now in another, and seeking as he went the best outlooks into the clear air of outer realities. And they began to discover that they were all meditating different aspects of the same thing, and they brought together their various discoveries and recognized the likeness between them, and the one thing often explained the other, and combining with it helped to a third. They grew in consequence more and more friendly and loving, so that every now and then one turned to another and said, as in surprise, "Why, you are my brother! Why, you are my sister!" And yet they had always known it. The change reached all. One who lived on the air of sweet sounds, and who was almost always to be found seated by her harp, or some other instrument, had till the late storm been generally merry and playful, though sometimes sad. But for a long time after that she was often found weeping, and playing little simple airs which she had heard in childhood, backward longings, followed by fresh tears. Before long, however, a new element manifested itself in her music. It became yet more wild and sometimes retained all its sadness, but it was mingled with anticipation and hope. The past and the future merged into one, and while memory yet brought the rain cloud, expectation threw the rainbow across its bosom, and all was uttered in her music, which rose and swelled, now to defiance, now to victory, then died in a torrent of weeping. As to the eldest sister, it was many days before she recovered from the shock. At length one day her brother came to her, took her by the hand, led her to an open window, and told her to seat herself by it and look out. She did so, but at first saw nothing more than an unsympathizing blaze of sunlight. But as she looked, the horizon widened out, and the dome of the sky ascended, till the grandeur seized upon her soul, and she fell on her knees and wept. Now the heavens seemed to bend lovingly over her, and to stretch out wide cloud arms to embrace her. The earth lay like a bosom of an infinite love beneath her, and the wind kissed her cheek with an odor of roses. She sprang to her feet and turned in an agony of hope, expecting to behold the face of the Father. But there stood only her brother, looking calmly though lovingly in her emotion. She turned again to the window. On the hilltops rested the sky. Heaven and earth were one, and the prophecy awoke in her soul, that from betwixt them would the steps of the Father approach. Hitherto she had seen but beauty, now she beheld truth. Often had she looked on such clouds as these, and loved the strange ethereal curves into which the winds molded them, and had smiled as her little pet sister told her what curious animals she saw in them, and tried to point them out to her. Now they were as troops of angels, jubilant over her new birth, for they sang in her soul of beauty and truth and love. She looked down, and her little sister knelt beside her. She was a curious child with black, glittering eyes and dark hair, at the mercy of every wandering wind, a frolicsome, daring girl, who laughed more than she smiled. She was generally in attendance on her sister, and was always finding and bringing her strange things. She never pulled a primrose, but she knew the haunts of all the orchis tribe, and brought from them bees and butterflies innumerable as offerings to her sister. Curious moths and glowworms were her greatest delight, and she loved the stars because they were like the glowworms. But the change had affected her too, for her sister saw that her eyes had lost their glittering look and had become more liquid and transparent. And from that time she often observed that her gaiety was more gentle, her smile more frequent, her laugh less bell-like, and although she was as wild as ever, there was more elegance in her motions and more music in her voice, and she clung to her sister with far greater fondness than before. The land reposed in the embrace of the warm summer days. The clouds of heaven nestled around the towers of the castle, and the hearts of its inmates became conscious of a warm atmosphere, of a presence of love. They began to feel like the children of a household when the mother is at home. Their faces and forms grew daily more and more beautiful, till they wandered as they gazed on each other. As they walked in the gardens of the castle, or in the country around, they were often visited, especially the eldest sister, by sounds that no one heard but themselves, issuing from woods and waters, and by forms of love that lightened out of flowers and grass and great rocks. Now and then the young children would come in with a slow, stately step, and with great eyes that looked as if they would devour all the creation, say that they had met the Father amongst the trees, and that he had kissed them, and, added one of them once, I grew so big. But when the others went out to look, they could see no one, and some said it must have been the brother, who grew more and more beautiful and loving and reverend, and who had lost all traces of hardness, so that they wondered they could ever have thought him stern and harsh. But the eldest sister held her peace and looked up, and her eyes filled with tears. Who can tell, thought she, but the little children know more about it than we. Often at sunrise might be heard their hymn of praise to their unseen Father, whom they felt to be near, though they saw him not. Some words thereof once reached my ear through the folds of the music in which they floated, as in an upward snowstorm of sweet sounds. And these are some of the words I heard, but there was much I seemed to hear which I could not understand, and some things which I understood but could not utter again. We thank thee that we have a Father, and not a Maker, that thou hast begotten us, and not molded us as images of clay, that we have come forth of thy heart, and have not been fashioned by thy hands. It must be so. Only the heart of a father is able to create. We rejoice in it, and bless thee that we know it. We thank thee for thyself. Be what thou art, our root and life, our beginning and end, our all in all. Come home to us. Thou livest, therefore we live. In thy light we see. Thou art, that is all our song. Thus they worship and love and wait. Their hope and expectation grew ever stronger and brighter, that one day ere long the Father will show himself amongst them, and thenceforth dwell in his own house forevermore. What was once but an old legend has become the one desire of their hearts, and the loftiest hope is the surest of being fulfilled.
Well, once again, we are enjoying the fruits of life. I have some wine that I've poured. It's kind of my new favorite. I'm usually a big Malbec drinker or drinker of Malbec, and this time I've settled for a while on this Cabernet Sauvignon. It's Bar Dog, and I love it because there's a picture of a Boston Terrier on it. I grew up with Boston Terriers and Springer Spaniels, but primarily Boston Terriers, and we have one currently. His name is Horatio, and his name fits him very well. He's a Horatio for sure. And Sean's got that weird Wisconsin beer.
Udofot. Udofot. I don't know if it's gaining popularity or what. It's kind of maybe my new favorite. And then I'm also smoking my pipe tonight. It's some tobacco blend that I made about a year ago. So got my favorite Ashton Brindle pipe.
I just wanted to point out that when we left off, there was the Great Tempest, and the party was destroyed of the siblings that they were trying to put on, and the elder brother returned. It says, morning dawned, and there they laid, and there he stood. And I guess it doesn't really say that they are asleep, but we know that from Maria von Franz and other Jungian analysts that sleep in a story means that the conscience has become overwhelmed and it must sleep. And so this is such a big moment in the story that there's a kind of death to the old way. And the brother has returned, and things are new, and there's rain and frost that are cleansing the castle of paint and drapery. And the brother is saying, let it cleanse, because no storm can hurt the pillars and arches of these halls. And it's interesting that he's the one observing that.
Are you thinking that has some meaning about the psyche to it then?
Yes, because he's the one that's been down into the shadow, into hell, into Hades, and he's the one that has risen from that. And I think he comes back almost like this Holy Spirit. After his return, we have a lot of mention of wind. There's wind moving throughout the castle. It says the wind blew fresher through the loopholes in the shattered windows of the great rooms, and found its way by unknown passages to faces and eyes hot with weeping. It cooled and blessed them. And so it's interesting to me that the brother is returning and we have wind going on. And we talked about how he could be a Christ figure last time. And I'm still not 100% there, but I will say that if he is, I can see how he's not appealing, but Christ, the true Christ, is not appealing, and he's not nice in the Gospels.
Yeah.
If that's the direction George MacDonald wanted to go, I credit for him for making him out to be kind of a jerk. I'm not saying Christ was objectively a jerk, but I am saying that's how he was received. And if you read the Gospels closely, you can see it, I think.
Yeah. He wasn't just like a rainbows and butterflies guy.
No.
At all.
Right. And I credit George MacDonald, and maybe this speaks to his humanity, because I think he lived like in the Victorian era. And now granted, he is Scottish, so he wasn't ever English, but I'm sure, the English always put cultural pressure on the underdog to conform. I think that's always present. And so, I think about Victorian era images of Christ. He almost looks like a woman.
Christ?
Yes.
No.
Like he's pale and he looks sorrowful and just, and and so perhaps George MacDonald was overcorrecting that false notion of Christ.
Yeah, that's a good point.
In the Gospels and as Roman Catholics, we believe that, Christ ascends into heaven after his return from the harrowing of Hades. And I'm getting a little orthodox here too. But he sends then the Holy Spirit to guide the church. To me, this story reflects the movement of psyche and Christ in the psyche and the Holy Spirit in the psyche. And I think they're all, honestly, it's kind of blended. And is the brother just Christ? Well, no. I think the brother could be like an ordering, do I want to say this? Like an ordering principle in the psyche. He's definitely the leader, I would say, both in the beginning and in the second half. And the problem with him in the first half, though, is that no one listens and no one likes him. The other parts of the psyche are not serving him. And so if I were to go Jungian here, I would say he's the ego. He's the part of the psyche that wants order and control and wants to, order and control things. But the problem is that we have a very childish psyche in the beginning of the story. There's no mature masculine and feminine here. And I do think, for the record, that the reason why I value the church calendar, the liturgical calendar, is because I think we do have a need to unite our lives, our inner lives, our psyches, to the movement of the church, to the movement of Christ's life, because Christ is the incarnation. He is the fullness of what it means to be human. And if we have an external expression that reminds us of birth, death, and resurrection in ritual, that helps our own psyches manifest this. Because to me, this story, The Castle, it's not like a one and done deal. It happens over and over and over again inside of us every time there is a birth, death, and resurrection within us. This is I think we were just talking about this as we were pausing and getting our fruits of the earth ready. This is definitely my favorite thing I've ever read of George MacDonald. I was glad you were reading it, Sean, because I cannot read the second half of the story and not choke up or tear up. It's very, very moving to me. I love how the presence of rain and tears is everywhere in this part of the story.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, like, my spiritual father, I was once tearing up in front of him, and he just said to me, in the East, we have a saying that the tears are an opening of the heart. And I think that that is portrayed very well in this story. It's like a baptism.
Yeah, there's a lot of imagery. I liked the section about the brother and the astronomy
Mm-hmm.
a lot. Particularly towards the end. There's a quote. Now he learned what law and order and truth are, what consent and harmony mean, how the individual may find his own end and a higher end, where law and freedom mean the same thing. I like that part a lot, where law and freedom. It seems like the first half of the story is like surrounding law, like the brother is the law, and the second half is like freedom. And the brother helps foster the freedom maybe after the storm. But George MacDonald is saying it's the same thing. And to end that quote there, where law and freedom mean the same thing and purest certainty exists without the slightest constraint. Just, I really like that. I don't know what that last part means exactly. Purest certainty exists without the slightest constraint. I don't know if it means like they're so firm in their certainty it doesn't matter. Like they don't need constraint anymore. They're just like so convicted of their so close to the Father. And then the next line is, thus he stood on the earth and looked to the heavens. I just think that's like what everybody's striving for, is to, you're standing on the earth, but you're basically fixed into heaven, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that this story then is kind of a metaphor for your life, you know, the spiritual life, growing in spiritual life, and ultimately getting to that point.
I agree. And when I read that line that you went over a few times, and even the concluding line, thus he stood on the earth and looked to the heavens, the note that I wrote down is reality. Because I think reality is an integration of those two things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Definitely.
I guess to illustrate that integration a little bit more, I mean, I think in the beginning of the story we don't have the mature masculine and the mature feminine, and it seems to me that the eldest sister, she's kind of curious about her eldest brother, but she still doesn't really like him. And so I think we have this very interesting, like, separation of the young masculine and the young feminine. And that's normal, actually, if you watch little kids. You know, you think about cooties. You know, they don't really like the members of the opposite sex. And that's normal for children. But then there does come a time when the integration of the opposite sex is sought. And so I just love this line where it says, the voices of the men were deeper and yet seemed by their very depth more feminine than before, while the voices of the women were softer and sweeter and at the same time more full and decided. And to me, that speaks to the maturity of the masculine and the feminine in the story, but also the integration of the two. And then what immediately follows, well, there's, oh my gosh, there's that beautiful bit about the eyes, but I'm going to return back to that. But then we have this integration that you talked about, Sean, where, you know, where law and freedom are working together. And you're standing on earth and you're looking into heaven. And that's a powerful thing because I think that that is the self. And there's a lot of power to that. And yes, like there's not constraint. There's always tears though throughout all of this. And I love that because I love that it's not this like, okay, we had this big moment and now everything is perfect from now on. And no, that's not what it means to be alive. And I think a really powerful part that speaks to this is the paragraph where it talks about the girl who loves the music and how she is often found weeping and playing little simple airs which she had heard in childhood, backward longings followed by fresh tears. And then the music becomes more wild and sometimes retained all its sadness, but it was mingled with anticipation and hope. And I couldn't help but thinking about psychologist Dan Siegel and his work of how so much of who we are is shaped by our childhood, and he encourages us to return again and again and again to our childhood. Whenever we have a strong emotion, think about like, where did you first feel that as a child and what was the story behind that? And you can really grow in consciousness. And I see that being fleshed out in his story. And it's interesting, George MacDonald always seems to be writing about children.
He does. And there's the one line towards the end where there was kind of the story about how the kids would go out. They would think they met the father. And then the elder sister kind of reacting to that has a line, but the little children know more about it than we. And I think that's George MacDonald kind of speaking to your point, like your childish thought, like your memories as a child, than you maybe think.
Amen.
Or it's just there's a something there that we shouldn't overlook, as you're pointing out.
And I think it's lived out in your body. I think your gut, how you feel in your body when something comes up, is from your childhood. And that's how deep and integral it is that your body has learned this, and it has kept the memory of your childhood.
As I was thinking about these different stories about the people at the end here, they're different. The astronomy and the music, and I like the one girl liking the glowworms. I thought that was kind of, it's kind of cute.
Her. And okay, just before you go on, I just want to point out, I mean, it's really important that she doesn't ever lose that, but she becomes more of that as she matures. I love that girl. I love her. And if I look at this as a psyche, I just feel like George MacDonald had her in him.
But I thought that these different examples maybe speak to how important it is to like have, I don't know, hobbies or interests in things that are beautiful, like music and the universe, the stars. And if you have an interest in something like that, to just pursue it. And pursue it in, the truest way you can. And I just think he's saying, like, yeah, you should have these personal interests, I think, and you shouldn't be afraid to pursue them. Like, you need these interests, almost like leisure, kind of, but. And all these interests in different families, they all come together to like help the other ones become more full, which I thought was really cool.
That is super
cool. I think about just families then. Everybody's got different things that they're into, but you feed off each other. The more interests you have in truth, or the stronger then that family can be.
I'm just going to take your point. It's the exact point you're making, but I'm going to bring it to the level of the psyche. So I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep on the same track and just like branch out. It's almost like the brother, if he's the ego, instead of having the passions resist him, now he has the passions all working together for him. They're saying, why you are my brother, why you are my sister. It's almost like they're discovering the community of each other. And the ego, the eldest brother, instead of having to fight them now to like do their thing, we have this community, and it is creating beautiful things, as you say. And how does
that relate to the psyche exactly?
Well, I think sometimes if our ego is too strong, if we haven't looked at the shadow, if we haven't died, if the ego is never died, it's never gone to the depths, it's never said, I can't do this. And it's always trying to control the soul, control the life, control the spark, the passions. I'm saying this clumsily. You're going to waste your energy and you'll always be tired. You'll never get it done. And then I think in the end, the ego will die. I mean, in the end, the ego is not strong enough to just try to control everything all the time within the psyche. But then the death happens, and what can happen is the resurrection, where the ego is now friends with shadow and all these the passions. And I think this is reflected in fairy tales a lot. The Russian form of Cinderella, Vasilisa the Wise, she has this doll that's given to her by her mother. And I'm just going to quick paraphrase the story, but we'll have it for you in the show notes, listeners. And she ends up in the house, the hut of Baba Yaga, the great witch in Russian fairy tales. And Baba Yaga asks her to do these impossible tasks or else she's going to kill her. And the doll does all the tasks for her. And then she leaves Baba Yaga's hut and she conquers the evil stepmother and stepsisters with death. Baba Yaga has her take a skull with her, and the skull burns the evil stepmother and stepsisters to death. So it's like Vasilisa does have to go through the valley of death, but then she uses death to destroy what was hampering her. And she eventually learns to do the kind of work that the doll has done for her, but now she's doing it. It's like she's integrated the doll fully into her psyche. And I see the same sort of theme happening here with George MacDonald's story of the castle, in that it's like now the brother is the friend. I mean, now everybody's friends with the brother and they're doing their own work. And just these magnificent, beautiful things are resulting from it. But the brother doesn't have to beat him over the head.
So what was it that was preventing them from seeing that before, do you think?
Well, I think because they weren't willing to look at the shadow, at the depths. They had to almost like kill him so that he could go down. I mean, if he's the principal, if he's like the ego, I think they did have to kill him, and he had to see death and then return. And the tempest, I mean, there just had to be a lot of death, I think. And facing the shadow.
Did it make a difference in they felt like they caused the death? Because there's a lot of imagery in here about they felt like the eldest sister laid for days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I think it might be based in Freud, but his thing, I think it's Freud, is like you have to kill the father in order to resurrect him again within you. I mean, you don't literally kill your father, but your inner father. And so that he can resurrect in a more true way within you. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe there is like a conscience level of like you do have to kill some of these figures within you so that they can resurrect in a better way.
But that doesn't really totally go along with the story either, because like if you do that, you're not like remorseful that you did that. It's positive. Where the story is more like, it seems like there's a lot of remorse.
Well, I guess I'm not picking up on that as much. I mean, I don't know. Are they remorseful or are they just in shock because of the whole thing?
Well, there's the one line towards the end. What did it say? But it says they wondered they could ever have thought him so stern and harsh.
Yes, but I still don't think they're remorseful for killing him.
How not?
I mean, everything's so great now, and the brother is so changed.
Do you think the brother is that much changed? I know he's changed, but like that line, I wonder how much the brother changed versus how much they changed.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
The brother doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot. Like he smiles more, they said, but he's still right beside. Like they don't know he's there and he's there. Mm-hmm. Whereas that was very negative at the beginning of the story, and now at the end it's like not negative. It's kind of soothing, but.
No, that's a good point. That's a really good point. And maybe they could have always had that relationship with him.
Yeah, I get that feeling.
Sure.
Is what George MacDonald's maybe trying to say.
Yeah.
They just couldn't see it before.
Right.
But now they can, and they're kicking themselves like, how could we not have seen this before? Mm-hmm. It's so clear now.
Yeah, that's a really cool observation. It's like I think it takes something. I mean, have you ever had that experience though, where it's like you didn't know you had something in you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I'm still kind of wondering who the father is. Like the father never does show up in the story.
Yeah.
He's just like a figure they're hoping for. We talked the last time about how it was referenced a lot in the beginning part of the story about the legend or the tradition. And it's not referenced in here as much. But at the end it is at the very end. What was once but an old legend has become the one desire of their hearts. Like, I'm thinking the Father is like heaven then.
Like God, would you say? Or?
Yeah, maybe just God the Father, but almost like, yeah. I'm not quite sure what to think of the Father, I guess. I'm still trying to make sense of that a little bit more. There's a mystery about it. Mm-hmm. Is it the eldest sister that's kind of speaking at the end about the songs that the family sings? Or is it just George MacDonald maybe saying, like, there's these words that he hears, and then he quotes a lot of the words, but he said also, there was much I seemed to hear which I could not understand, and some things which I understood but cannot utter again. Like, I'm like, what is it that he couldn't utter again? It doesn't make sense to me.
Does it go beyond words?
Yeah, is it something like we couldn't even understand it then? Like he can understand it now, seeing this full reality, but we couldn't? Or I don't know. There's some type of mystery here with the Father that I don't get. And that's why I think it's like heaven. Like heaven is such a mystery that we cannot fathom. Mm-hmm.
I agree, Sean. I guess as you're talking, a few things come to mind, and that is, it's interesting though because I I think they kind of become the Father in a sense. Or it says that they had met the Father amongst the trees and that he kissed them and that they grew so big.
Well, they thought they did, though. I think it doesn't say later that yeah, she thought it was actually the brother.
Interesting. Okay.
Or some said it must have been the brother.
Yeah. I mean, and I love that that's mixed together and ambiguous, because I'm going to take a very Orthodox or Byzantine Catholic, anyway, an Eastern take on this, which I point again to St. Athanasius's quote, which God became man so that man might become God. Because I think, Christ says that the kingdom of heaven is within. And I can't help it, maybe I'm reading into it, but I can't help but see some of that in this story, that we have it in us. I mean, God is in us.
Yeah.
We become God. Not fully. And I like how he plays with that.
Yeah.
They meet the Father, do they? Or was it the older brother? Who can tell? Who knows? But
yeah, that's George MacDonald. He's leaving it mysterious for a reason. I just don't know exactly what the reason is, but
well, I think it does go beyond words. But I definitely think it was part of the prophecy, right? That when heaven and earth met, then the Father's footsteps could be heard. I wish.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember where that is or what the exact. Oh yeah. Okay. Heaven and earth were one. She turned again to the window. On the hilltops rested the sky. Heaven and earth were one. The prophecy awoke in her soul that from betwixt them would the footsteps of the Father approach. And so, I mean, if the story, the second half that we're discussing here, is about integration, I do see God entering into this soul or this psyche and into the story, but it's through the brother. I mean, it's through this integration of heaven and earth. And I mean, what else is the incarnation other than God becoming man? And then, as Saint Athanasius says, man becomes God. And again, we leave room open that we're not literally God, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah. What's the heresy about? I forget what the term is for that type of thought.
Shoot. Is it pantheism? Where God, nature is God. You're right. Yeah. You're right. So we don't believe that, but it is a mystery, and
mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just speaking to where you're saying that who is the Father, and what's his role here, and why is there so much mystery enshrouded and when you said things which I understood but cannot utter again, I know what that is. Okay, so I've been to Rome and I've been to St. Peter's and I've witnessed Mass at St. Peter's. And someone just asked me, what's the difference between the Mass you witnessed at St. Peter's versus the Mass you witness in your hometown versus the Mass at St. Agnes and St. Paul, which, I mean, they do these beautiful, orchestral Latin masses. I think it's usually the Novus Ordo in Latin at these orchestral masses. And yes, those are all so different. They're such different masses, but je ne sais quoi. I cannot tell you why or how they're different. I literally have no words for that. But I understand that they're different.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, maybe that's what he's saying. You understand it, but maybe there's a little difference there with that. Wait, because he says, which I understand but cannot utter again.
Yeah.
I don't know if that means that you can't put it into words, or it's like you don't even want to put it in words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Because yeah. Why would you think you wouldn't want to put something into words?
Is it so mysterious that You don't even want to try putting it into words.
Yeah.
You're just not even going to utter it.
Yeah, because almost like uttering it would cheapen it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And by the way, I think you're right. I think this end part is George MacDonald's narration. He has heard this music, and he is now giving what he heard to us. But I love this. We thank thee that we have a Father and not a Maker, that thou hast begotten us, not molded us as images of clay. And I am appreciating how radical the Christian understanding of God the Father is, the Judeo-Christian, I should say. And it just is not to be found anywhere else. Not in paganism, not in Islam, not in atheism, not in the clockwork understanding of God. Maybe I should qualify the traditional Judeo-Christian understanding of God. That reflection of George MacDonald really fleshes that out and punches us in the face with it. Like, no, God is not just a maker. I mean, he is not just a molder, but in fact, we have come forth from his heart, and he is our Father.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it seems to almost contradict the creation story a little bit, what he's saying.
Which creation story?
Well, I don't know. Maybe he's saying, like, if you take it so literal, then...
Yes.
Is that what he's saying?
Well, I had not thought of that until you brought that up, though. I love that, Sean.
Maybe it's a dig on certain denominations that are so literal in their interpretation. I don't know.
Yes. No, I think you're right. I mean, I think the more fundamentalist you get, the more modern you get. I really do believe that.
And he was Calvinist, so he rebelled against that. They're very fundamentalist, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
If you're
you're
a Calvinist, you probably should not listen to this show.
But I
just saying. Well, you're welcome to, but you're not going to walk away smiling, okay? Like, yes, all are welcome. Calvinists, you're welcome to listen to our show.
He is somehow saying maybe that he is rebelling against that a little bit with what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would like to know. I mean, George MacDonald sounds very Catholic in his writings, for sure.
And Orthodox.
Eastern Catholic.
Yeah, both.
Yeah,
both ends. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I really love that. I guess I can see where C.S. Lewis. It kind of reminds me of how Aslan appears in Narnia. Like, he'll just appear all of a sudden, but then they're always like waiting and hoping for his reappearance, and they're always hoping for the time when Aslan and them will dwell together forever. And what was once an old legend has become the one desire of their heart.
I'm curious what this legend was.
Well, yes, and
it never says it, but it's referenced so many times.
Right, it is the thread, but here's where George MacDonald and I may diverge, because George MacDonald never does become Roman Catholic or Orthodox, and so
that we know of.
Fair enough, Sean. Fair enough. But even this line, for us who come from a more high liturgical background, so I'll include high church Anglicans in this too. It's not an old legend. Because of our high liturgy, because of the importance of liturgy, because of the importance of our tradition, it's never an old legend. The legend and the desire are always one, moving together.
But I think that is what he's saying. It's exactly what he's saying. Because he's saying at one time it was an old legend, but now it's just the desire of their hearts.
But I'm saying...
It's the same thing.
Is it though? Like, it's almost like he's saying they don't need the legend anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying we do still need the legend. We still need the liturgy.
I guess I wasn't thinking of the legend as the liturgy, but...
Yeah, it might not be. I don't know why. I'm just thinking that it is. Well, I mean, what else is tradition and legend? If we're equating the tradition that's been mentioned throughout the story with this, an old legend, I can't help but think about tradition and liturgy as the same thing.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just trying to look back at the places. Old tradition said that these rooms would be kept entirely. Yeah, it's maybe more of a way of life than the liturgy part, but yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. But you could argue then, if you're living the fullest life as a Catholic, that would there be that much difference between your life and the liturgy?
No,
maybe not.
No, absolutely not. And I think that speaks to my point about why we need the liturgy and how.
Yeah, I think I kind of understanding what you're saying now.
I think this would be a good time for me to pivot to a topic I wanted to just go over, because I thought it was spelled out really cool in the story. And I'm referring to the line that says, now the eyes that had often an expression as if their sight was absorbed in the gaze of the inward eyes. And when the eyes of two met, there passed between those eyes the utterance of a conviction that both meant the same thing. But the change was, of course, to be seen more clearly, though not more evidently, in individuals. And I just want to focus on the part about the eyes. As I mentioned in our last podcast, I'm an iconographer in training, and so much of the icon is built around the eye. So you measure the forehead by the eye. Almost everything about the face is measured by the size of the eye. And in the forehead, you, at least in the Cretan style, you draw this ball, and it's like the inner eye. And I'm still learning what the inner eye means from an ancient Christian Orthodox perspective. But I did want to share this quote by St. John Chrysostom about the eye. The eye is, to be sure, a small organ in size, but it is more important than all the rest of the body. Actually, of course, everything in us is a proof of the wisdom of God, but the eye is so more than any other organ. In truth, it governs the entire body. It adorns the countenance. It is a lamp for all the members. What the sun does in the world, this the eye does in the body. If you should extinguish the sun, you would destroy everything and create chaos. If you should extinguish the light of the eyes, the feet would also be useless, and the hands in even life. Now, if the eyes have been disabled, wisdom also departs, because by them we know God. Surely then, the eye is the light not merely of the body, but also of the soul, more than of the body. And I just want to say, he's not saying that if you are literally physically blind, that you lack wisdom. But I think if we look at this from a symbolic meaning, what does the eye do? And this article, I'm getting this quote from this wonderful article from the Orthodox Arts Journal called The Epiphany of the Eye. And this author of this article, Tudor Mitrovich, makes such an interesting observation that the black part of your eye, I can't remember what it's called right now, but it's like a little black hole insofar as it only receives light and images, but it never projects light back. It only absorbs and it doesn't come back out. And in iconography, you never put a glint in the eye in the pupil. The pupil must be black. And in iconography, black means hell, or black is usually, it's a color you typically don't use in icons because it means darkness or like Hades. And it's also used to paint the cave where Christ was born, by the way, but that's a whole other topic we could get into. I mean, what a reflection of this story. Like the black, the shadow that's a part of the person. And these people in the story, the siblings, have eyes that often have expression as if their sight was absorbed in the gaze of the inward eyes. And I just think what a great connection.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really neat. I didn't know that about the eyes, I guess, in the icons. But that's pretty cool. Well, that might be about the end here.
I think so. This has been such a fun one to discuss, and there's always more depths and heights we could explore, but all good things must come to an end eventually. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to our episode on the second part of The Castle. If you liked what you heard, please do share this podcast with your friends and get the word out about what we're doing. And if you believe in our mission of bringing George MacDonald back into the culture, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/George MacDonald and us, or you can find a link to our Patreon page in the show notes, and we have support available for as little as $3 a month. So if you'd like to come aboard on this journey, we really appreciate the support. If you have a comment or a question about the show, we'd love to hear from you, and you can find us on email at georgemacdonaldandus@gmail.com. That's all one word and no capitalization. Once again, thank you for listening, and we hope you have a great rest of your night or day. Take care.
Yep, thank you.